There are a number of words in this small reading about the birth of Christ that describes Joseph in a very positive way, and I think also fits in with what we discussed earlier today of him being more of a younger man than an older man. It is interesting that in the Gospel of Matthew, Joseph is the one who has the privilege of naming the baby Jesus. In Luke's Gospel, it's Our Lady who is told to name the child Jesus, or actually Emmanuel. And so Joseph, one of his privileges was to be the one who gave the name Jesus to Mary's firstborn. One of the words here that is in a bit of a contention with scripture scholars is the word betrothed. According to the New American Bible, in the footnote to verse 18, it says that betrothal is the first part of the marriage contract or covenant, constituting a man and a woman as husband and wife. So with betrothal, they are already considered married, except the marriage ceremony itself and the coming together to be man and wife at home, that comes a bit later. And so with the betrothal, then subsequent infidelity is considered adultery. And the betrothal was followed some months later when the wedding ceremony takes place, usually I think at the bride's house, and then they process back with the whole entourage to the house that the husband himself has been preparing, and then the time of normal married life then begins. There is a reason in the Jewish ceremony of having some time between betrothal and the actual wedding ceremony and the coming together, because in those days everything that they fixed for a celebration was from scratch. They didn't have refrigerators and microwaves, and one of the things that's always puzzled me in the scriptures, and you hear this with Abraham. Remember when the three angels came walking across the desert? And he ran and told Sarah to make some cake right away, biscuits or whatever that was, and then he ran out to the herds and said, quick, kill the fatted calf. And it sounds like in about 30 minutes they had I don't know whether some of you I know have done butchering. You don't take a fatted calf and in 30 minutes you've got barbecue. I mean, so that has always puzzled me, but I'm sure that if a person looked into it, you'd find some reason. It's probably so that they don't have to spend the rest of the book describing how they actually prepared and the number of days it took to do that. But that was one of the things. The man's father was the one that was responsible for the wine, and he made it. I mean, they didn't go down to the store and buy it, they made it. And so the husband's father and family were the ones who were responsible for the wine. And probably some of the other, whatever other things they were going to share at the actual celebration after the marriage ceremony. The bride's family probably responsible for other things. So it took a number of days, maybe a week or so, to get all that together. And probably a lot of it that would have spoiled was probably fixed fairly close, if not the day of the celebration. It gives you some sense in John chapter 2, at the wedding feast of Cana, why Our Lady would be noticing that the wine ran out. Because if that happened, it is an embarrassment not only for the father of the groom, but it's for the whole groom's family, because they didn't make enough. And so it could be quite a shock to find out that some of the party celebration was missing or not enough. I don't know whether if they were married, let's see, in Matthew they would have been probably in Bethlehem. They don't get to Nazareth until after the coming back from Egypt in Matthew's gospel. So, but it would have taken some time to get that all together, and so that's one of the reasons why there is some time. I couldn't find an exact time. It probably varied according to families and how quick they could get things together, but there is some time between betrothal and actual coming together as man and wife in the marriage ceremony. Now, this word betrothal is a whole lot different from our English word fiancé. Back in the 1970s, when the Living Bible was first published, they said that Mary and Joseph were fiancés, that it was in the text, and I can remember the furor that caused, because it's not the same thing as betrothal. If you are in an agreement with someone to be a fiancé, that's not a permanent relationship. That being a fiancé is simply a promise that we might get married and we might not. It's more of a friendship relationship, and it can be quite exclusive also, but it's not a binding like betrothal is. Also, the word engagement in our culture would be the next step, and that probably is more binding, because I think at that time is where usually a ring is given as a pledge of future marriage. So it gets a bit more serious as time goes on. But many of the way we in our culture in this day and time do some of these things, it's not betrothal is marriage. I mean, the two man and woman are considered married at that point. So anything that happens to break that betrothal then is considered in the Mosaic law is a very serious violation. One other word you sometimes hear in our day and time is the word infatuation, and that's simply interest in someone in a kind of a what would you call it, overboard way. I looked that word up. Of all things, I found this out watching Jeopardy. You know, one of the questions had to do with infatuation, and what is the meaning. The basic, deep-down meaning of the word infatuation. And so I went to the dictionary. In the root of that word is the Latin word fatuus, F-A-T-U-U-S, fatuus, and in fatuus. Fatuus means foolish, and in fatuus means foolishness. Now, I don't know how women and girls act, but I know we men, if you're infatuated with somebody, you do some foolish things. You know, and I've run into, I mean, in my family, I remember one of the brother-in-laws, I mean, he was walking on air, you know, when she said yes, and I mean, it just totally changed his personality for the longest time. And so infatuation, the basic root of that word is foolish, or to be in foolishness. And so that's another one of the words that you sometimes hear. You don't hear this in the Jewish culture, at least not at the time of Mary and Joseph. So the word betrothed, it means a much deeper relationship and a much more binding relationship than some of the words we use today, like fiancé, engagement, and some others. It's really not totally binding in our culture until the actual yes is said, and there are plans already started to be made. And I suppose, or at least I've seen it happen, where even up to the day of the marriage, it can fall apart. So, but that couldn't happen with a betrothal arrangement. Now, there's a wonderful book called the Catholic Bible Dictionary by, I think Dr. Scott Hond is one of the major contributors to that book. It's been out for a while. I remember it was 2009 or 10 when that book was published. It's a pretty good sized book, but some of those articles are absolutely astounding. But under the entrance of marriage, this dictionary says marriage in Old Testament times was generally arranged by the families of the bride and the groom. So this was not something that they arranged for themselves, although they probably had a say in this arrangement, but it was the parents, the families who arranged these betrothals and marriages. And also, the law of Moses does codify laws against infidelity of the spouses in the betrothal relationship and in the marriage relationship itself. So it's one of the reasons why in the Jewish ceremonies and the relationships of the man and woman in both of these situations, betrothal and marriage, that the code of Deuteronomy in 22 verses 23 and 27, it says that those who were married and even the couples who were betrothed but did not yet live together as a husband and wife, the betrothed were subject to special laws enumerated in this chapter of Deuteronomy. And these laws presuppose that a betrothed couple was already married in a legal sense, so any involvement with somebody else was equivalent to adultery and rendered both the man and the woman involved in the impropriety were subject to being stoned to death. So both were responsible for. However, if the man or the woman who's originally involved in the betrothal, if she or he is not, they're not involved in anything, then in a sense they are free then of that relationship. But it is a very serious thing when you think about stoning. I mean, we just celebrated, what was it, Tuesday? St. Stephen. The one I always think of was Susanna in the book of Daniel. In the Mosaic law, you had to have 2 to 3 witnesses who could vouch for the fact that something actually happened. And in the Mosaic code, let's say that 2 or 3 of us get together and we blame somebody else here for something they didn't do, and it's proven that we are lying, then the penalty that we were trying to inflict on the person that we were accusing falsely falls on us. This is kind of a mean thing to say, but I sometimes think this part of the Mosaic law should be reenacted today. We get so many lying politicians and whatnot, and they're accusing, right? It's kind of, at times, kind of strange to see how that operates. I don't know whether you follow the news or not, but the House of Representatives was without a speaker for about 2 months over the summertime. And I thought it was kind of funny, but the poor guy who got eventually was nominated and got the job, he wasn't in that job 48 hours and they were already whining and complaining about what he was doing. I thought, don't we give people chances anymore these days? I mean, but it's just the differences sometimes between us and what Mary and Joseph in their time would have been involved in is just like night and day at times. But the parties to breaking a betrothal, especially if it's with another party, then the Mosaic covenant then is not just suggesting, but the penalty is stoning to death. So they did not take this situation lightly. It was a very serious union between the man and the woman. In Dr. Hahn's dictionary, he has this statement: this union of betrothal of a man and a woman in one flesh was meant to be a lifelong relationship, and it's indissoluble. The institution of marriage, however, even in that day and time, suffered from the concupiscence of the fall, and selfishness and distrust strains the relationship between man and woman. And so the law of Moses consequently permitted divorce or remarriage in some circumstances as a concession, as Jesus himself says in Matthew 19, verse 8, as a concession to the hardness of heart. It is a concession that's not lightly made, but in some circumstances it was allowed by the Mosaic code. And so we have Joseph then struggling with all of these different things that are happening in his relationship with Mary. And he's probably having some very serious doubts, which is not a bad thing. It's good for us once in a while to doubt. I remember reading once Mother Teresa of Calcutta. They say that she, in her time, went through some of the darkest times of doubt that any human being could actually suffer. And it was so deep, in fact, that when she was up for, I don't know, have they canonized Mother Teresa yet? Did they?
Yes.
But some of the opposition against her canonization was from that very fact that they thought she wasn't true to her religious vocation because of that experience of doubt. And evidently it was quite deep. But I mentioned this morning Padre Pio and his rosary. Mother Teresa of Calcutta was another one. I remember seeing pictures of her, and she always had that little glass bead rosary wrapped around the fingers of her left hand. That was her mainstay. I meant to, you probably know this, but one of the other things that I had found out about Padre Pio is that he suffered from insomnia. And one of the monks one of the friars in the convent in which they lived asked him what he did in the nighttime when he couldn't sleep. And he prayed the rosary, one after another. I think they said that he prayed as many as 12 rosaries a day for various reasons. And when they asked him why he did that, Padre Pio's answer was, what better thing could you do when you can't sleep than pray to Our Lady? And so we have these examples of even in the midst of something like with St. Joseph in doubting what happened or his relationship with Mary, it brought him to a deeper love, I think, for her once it was resolved. And it gets resolved in a most wondrous way. One of the things that maybe we don't catch on to right away is that Joseph is described as a righteous man right in the middle of this doubt, right in the middle of where he finds out that his betrothed is with child, and in the middle of that struggle, the scriptures say he's a just man. An unjust man would have immediately broke the betrothal and gone his way. Find somebody else who could be true. But Joseph didn't do that. He's a righteous man, the scripture said, a just man. And as a devout observer of the Mosaic law, he may have wished to break his union with Mary when he found out about her pregnancy, but he was unwilling to do so. That really speaks to who Joseph is. He's got this absolutely serious situation that he's facing and is part of, and yet he's unwilling to do something that would expose her. It points back to what I said this morning when Thomas Aquinas describes or defines what true Christian love is. It is a total caring about another person. There's not to be any selfishness at all in that caring and in that sense of love for the other person. And far too often love is seen as what's in it for me. That seems to be a kind of a byword in this day and time as people look at things from what's in it for me. And so Joseph is not that kind of an individual. He's unwilling to expose his dear Mary to any kind of shame. It really points to the justness of who this man is and his solidness in trying to find out what is God's will in all of this. And so in Deuteronomy 22, verses 20 to 21, this is the passage that most scholars would usually apply to Joseph's situation. The problem is it does not clearly pertain to Joseph and Mary's situation. And so this gives then Joseph the opportunity to, as so many translations mistranslate, divorce her quietly. So there is, I don't want to call it a loophole in the Mosaic law, but there is evidently not being able to prove the other party or to find that there is another party involved with Mary other than Joseph. And so there's, how did this happen? And evidently not being able to find that out, it gives Joseph some sense of he can do something that would quietly remove himself from the situation and not cause her any kind of public shame, and certainly not that she would be stoned. That was probably one of his horrors, that he did not want to see his beloved wife to be, or he actually a betrothal, it was his wife, that he did not want to see her stoned. And so his care for her is really very deep. And so Joseph then, in describing him as a righteous man, to be just, as St. Francis de Sales, this is a quote from him, he says, to be just is to be perfectly united to the divine will, and to be always conformed to it in all sorts of events, whether preposterous, adverse, dangerous, or whatever. That St. Joseph was this, no one can doubt. He was totally just, and his care and concern was completely for Mary. And she, not most probably, she did her best in this time of doubt to convince him of what happened. That it was not another man, that it was God's Holy Spirit that overshadowed her. And so one of the most important actions that we see in St. Joseph, as he's described in the New Testament, is his response to the discovery that his new wife is pregnant. It is within the biblical recounting of this story that St. Joseph is called just. I find that, what would you say, to give you a deeper sense of just the character and the virtue of the man named Joseph. That even in the midst of his wife explaining to him what happened to her, and that he's having so many doubts about what's the next thing he has to do, that the Holy Scriptures would say in this whole situation he remains and is a just, righteous man. So there have been down through the ages any number of ideas that have surfaced from the early centuries up until today about Joseph and his doubts of what happened to Mary and what he does next. And the first one is that he, St. Joseph, suspects Mary of adultery and decides to divorce her. This was promoted by many of the apocryphal writings that we mentioned this morning. It was also promoted by several of the fathers of the church, but it's not generally accepted as a valid way of looking at Joseph in this situation, because he was not he wasn't trying to figure out a way to get rid of her. He was trying to get a way to save her. The second idea that arose, St. Joseph is perplexed by Mary's pregnancy, but he does not doubt her innocence. He is confused and uncertain as to what he must do, and so he decides on divorce quietly. This idea was promoted by some of the church fathers, and it became one of the most common theories during the time of the church fathers, the early centuries, and they dubbed it as Joseph's doubt. But it also did not last very long, because it really doesn't portray Joseph as just. It again looks to him as he's trying to get out of it for his own sake, and that's not what Scripture is trying to point out. It's not what a just man would do. So a third idea developed in the last centuries, that Joseph discovers that Mary is pregnant but does not doubt her at all. When she begins to explain to him how and what happened to her, he has no doubts whatever about what she's telling her. He believes her. He accepts what she's saying. His faith is solidly in her and what she's telling him, which again points to how just and how loving he is towards his spouse Mary. He doubts his own unworthiness and ability to take care of her and her child. So he's beginning to see, bringing it back to himself, and not looking to dismiss her, but to dismiss himself. As a just man, he realizes that Mary now belongs to God. She's now the spouse of the Holy Spirit. And he decides to separate himself from her quietly out of justice to God and reverence for her. He is willing to step aside so as not to reveal her mystery. And some of the fathers of the church, as well as many of medieval saints, theologians, and even some of our church mystics promote this idea that Joseph absolutely and certainly and truly believed what she was telling him, and his whole concern was for her safety and her well-being, and that he saw himself as so unworthy of this whole notion of him being her husband and foster father to her son, that he's looking for ways to dismiss himself, not her. Again, that points to he's a just, righteous man. Now, all of these ideas hinge on the translation of the Greek word, which is normally translated as divorce. I don't know whether some of you have ever been involved in translating from one language to another. I suspect here is probably Spanish to English or English to Spanish. But do you often run into words that just absolutely can't be translated? Mm-hmm. And that's true of every language on the face of the earth. These idioms, I mean, if I am trying to explain to someone who doesn't know English very well, and I tell him that this whole idea is out in left field, you can almost picture them looking at me in left field with a baseball glove. Because it's an idiom in English, it means you don't know what you're talking about, you're crazy, you're loony. I mean, some of these, but it doesn't mean that somebody's out in left field with a baseball glove. So you can almost see how someone would pull their hair out trying to get that from English in there. You know, I read a lot of Cardinal Ratzinger's early works and also writings that he did when he was Pope Benedict. And I keep a German dictionary. This thing is that thick by my table, because in the footnotes it's all German, and I'm just desperate to know what that man really said in his own language. And then I found out that the language in Bavaria is a dialect and not the what would you call it, the normal German that's spoken throughout the whole country. That there's a dialect that he and his family and others in, where was he from, Munich or one of those areas of Bavaria, they had a dialect of their own that they used when they were by themselves. So if he's writing in that and you don't know that, you know, for heaven's sakes. I mean, so this sense of using the word divorce in the relationship of what Joseph is planning to do is based on this difficulty of translating a Greek word. The Greek word is apoluo, A-P-O-L-U-O, apoluo. And it does not mean, as its primary meaning, is not divorce. That word, and I looked this up in the Greek interlinear New Testament, and they translate it into the RSV as dismissing. That he was looking a way to dismiss her, not divorce her. So the original, or one of the primary meanings of this Greek word, it can mean to separate oneself from a situation. It can mean to conceal oneself or hide oneself from a situation. It can mean to distance oneself from a situation, or it can mean to dismiss someone And the last meaning and the weaker meaning of this word is divorce. And so the New American says divorce. The RSV Catholic edition in Matthew 1:19, this is the way they translated. And her husband Joseph, being a just man and unwilling to put her to shame, resolved to send her away quietly. So again, as a just man, in the original language of Greek, which is the original language of the New Testament, it does not say that he wanted to divorce her. He's wanting to remove himself so that whatever God is doing in her life for the salvation of Israel, which would have been his concern, or what the Jews at that time would have been considering, was the Messiah was coming first of all for them. And so Joseph would see himself as a hindrance to what God was doing with Mary. And so that may be the idea he had in his head when he's saying, as a just man, I will look for a way to divorce her quietly. The one thing that we might keep in mind, and maybe Joseph himself didn't realize at first, is this is a test. It's a test, that was one of the worst words you could always hear when you were in school. Today's test day. His virtue and his cooperation with grace needed to be put to the test because God intended to make him a spiritual father to a new covenantal people. And so Joseph had to come to an understanding that his being a part of the Holy Family is in God's plan. And it's a test to see whether or not he's actually going to do what the angel told him to do, which comes a little later. But right now we look at Joseph, and he's probably doing the same thing Mother Teresa of Calcutta did. He's wondering what in the world is going on here. St. Augustine, in one of his treatises on the virtues, said that untried virtue is no virtue. You have to think about that a little bit, but if you're never tried for any virtue that you think you have, then you don't have that virtue. If nothing ever upsets you or makes you angry, you may not know whether or not you got patience. And that's one of the most lost virtues in our day and time is patience. I don't really like all the things that go on. I don't celebrate Christmas until it's Christmas, which it is right now. This is the Christmas season. Stupid me, when I was a deacon, I gave a homily one time during Advent, and I said, this is not the Christmas season. This is not the time to be buying packages and gaily wrapping them and putting up trees, and I went on and on. And I was saying, you gotta, the liturgical year is Advent, Christmas, Epiphany, and then, the year goes on. And I was so proud of myself. I thought, boy, I really, After Mass, I was standing there greeting people as they came out, and two mothers, mattered and a wet hen. They told me that I had just destroyed their kids' Christmas. That was not my intention, and I have learned since to keep my big mouth shut when it comes to things that, although I have been accused of having the knack of doing that without being recognized that I'm doing it. So I don't know, maybe I always blame the Holy Spirit. I probably should stop that too, because I think the Spirit's probably getting a bit upset with that. But virtue is something that will be tried. And you've probably already gone through some of that. One of the things, there's a wonderful passage that I always like. It comes up in the Liturgy of the Hours as a small reading every once in a while. This is in Judith chapter 8, starting at verse 24, when the council at the city were trying to wiggle out of the Assyrians who were threatening to attack the city and destroy the town. And they were trying to appease Holofernes, the commander of the I think it's the Assyrian, or was it Syrian army. And Judith is the one who comes forward with the common sense. And this is what she says to that city council. Therefore, my brothers, let us set an example for our kinsmen. Their lives depend on us, and the defense of the sanctuary, the temple, and the altar, it rests on us. And besides all of this, we should be grateful to the Lord our God for putting us to the test, as he did all our forefathers. Grateful for being tested. This is a hardy woman. And she goes on, recall how he dealt with Abraham, how he tried Isaac, and all that happened to Jacob in Syria of Mesopotamia while he was attending the flocks of Laban, his mother's brother. Not for vengeance did the Lord put them in the crucibles to try their hearts, nor has he done that with us. It is by way of admonition that he chastises those who are close to him.